Hi, everyone. My name is Robin Stafford, and I am the Regional Engagement Officer for various UVA clubs, including the UVA Club of Charlottesville. On what would have been the final Saturday of Historic Garden Week in Virginia, we're pleased to offer a tour of a Charlottesville garden, which is actually slated to be part of Garden Week 2021. Pam Callery, president of the Charlottesville Club, is a gardening enthusiast and happily hosted this event and invited our other UVA clubs in Virginia to join. Because of weather considerations, we opted to film Leslie's garden several days ago. And looking at the weather outside in Charlottesville right now, we're happy about that decision. Leslie is here with us.
Hello.
The tour is about 15 minutes and she will answer your questions afterwards. We've had a great response to this and it is good to see so many Who's and friends join us. I'd like to highlight just a few technical aspects of the program. As you saw when you signed in, this Zoom session is being recorded. Your mic and camera are automatically muted. You can enable speaker view in the top right corner during the presentation if desired, allowing you to see only the person speaking. If you have questions during the presentation, please type them in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen, and Leslie will address as many as she can. If the video seems a little choppy at any point, it's because we're using a streaming platform. Please bear with us if you experience any hiccups and we'll adjust if need be. Enjoy the tour and we'll see you here at the conclusion.
Hey, my name's Keleher Harris and I graduated in 1983. The guy taking this film is my husband and he graduated in 81 and we met just down the street at Mem Gym, which is kind of fun. How many of you guys looked at that course offering and thought, oh, I could take a gym class and get a credit? Yes, I will do that. So that's where we met. We have two children who are both Wahoos and their spouses are both Wahoos. So it's really very inbred in the most glorious sort of way. And this is Ginny, Virginia. Yeah, very inbred. So my husband and I graduated and then we moved up to Connecticut for over 30 years. But we missed Charlottesville so much that we moved right back down about 6 years ago. And we bought this wonderful house in this wonderful neighborhood that's right in between Lewis Mountain and the university. And it's a really interesting piece of land. I've enjoyed gardening on it. That is my avocation. It's also my vocation because I run a gardening business. This garden will be on a historic garden tour next year, which for some of you who know about it is a really fun event that takes place in Virginia in every other year besides one where we have a pandemic. Anyway, what I wanted to do today is have my dog roll all over my pansies and have me walk you all over my garden to show you some various really neat plants, some design features, some kind of permaculture, not so beautiful things, some things that have gone well, some things that have failed, and just explore around the garden. So come with me. So I'm going to start you in the front of the house, which is my neat, sunny spot. I need it to be neat because everybody knows my address and I am in the business. So I also love it because I can do some things that are not subject to some of my wildlife in the back, such as voles. So I do a bunch of tulips and I have just a cacophony of color this year. These latest ones are just hanging on because we've had really low temperatures. Ginny's crying in the background. And they're just great. I can't even tell you the names of them, but they're those late double tulips and they're easy enough to find if you order online. What happens is this huge amount of color. Over the winter, there's basically nothing except my green meatballs, and I'm kind of crazy about pruning. We'll talk about that as we go on. For instance, this should be a full-size tree, but no, I want it to be a lollipop because I want full sun here. In the summer, when all this dies back, what comes along is some really tall perennials, and some of them are. I have a huge population of Annabelle Hydrangeas up there. I have Joe Pye weed, which was supposed to be little Joe, but hey, it's 6 feet tall, go figure. I have, that really cool fall flowering aster. It's the Tartaricus. It's called Gin Dai. I recommend. It's purple and a really good pollinator. I have the Japanese anemone, which in full sun, it's a good shade plant, but in full sun, it'll get nice and tall. And I have one over here. These are some lilies that are coming, but, well, I have a dead plant. And, you know, dead plants are sad, but for me, dead plants are an opportunity to go shopping. So this is the one I wanted to point out. I love the gray-green foliage on this plant. This is the Rudbeckia Maxima, and it's really very cool looking. It gets about this tall. It looks almost prehistoric, and goldfinches love it. So this is just a riot of tall, tall perennials in summer. Okay, let's go explore around the back. So you saw the sunny, neat front part of my garden, but a lot of this garden is woodland. And we have some very lovely, very old trees. This is the biggest one on the property. It is a tulip poplar, and I love it. Tulip poplars grow very quickly, so it's actually probably not that old. It might be over 100 years old. Do you see that bat box near the top? I am trying to have a lot of bat boxes to attract a lot of bats because I love bats. No, I do not love bats. I love it how bats eat mosquitoes. So you might notice those on a few more trees. This tree is married to a fairly old, maybe about the same age, white oak. I'm not very good at trees. Yeah, white oak. And my arborist, who I employed immediately because any of these trees could crush us in our sleep, said that it's okay that this is a leaner and that these two are married and they're supporting each other. So I thought that was kind of cool. Underneath, we have understory of some beautiful dogwoods, which I didn't plant, but I really, really appreciate it. Somebody, really gardened well here about 20 or 30 years ago. But anything tiny I planted, and some of the things I love that stand out to me, I love bright green, lime green, or in a garden, and I love the juxtaposition of a lime green with a really dark plant. So this is a heuchera, it's probably citronelle, and this is, I think it is, yeah. And this is an Ophiopogon, which they call mondo grass, and that's the black mondo grass. So I like that kind of juxtaposition in a lot of different places in my garden. All these stones in this property, you just dig and you get a stone. And so somebody lined these paths with them. They were kind of falling apart and not very even. So I've augmented them and it's really been fun. Also in this yard, there were some really mature and beautiful azaleas. And my husband loves golf, and his favorite tournament is the tournament like no other, the Masters, which we didn't have this year. So he made a request for a backyard like no other. I have planted over 200 azaleas in this yard. Don't get all excited. I've only gardened here for 6 years and they were this big when they started. But ultimately it's going to be a really good show. And I like this bed. It's just really plain. It's a nice euphorbia in the front. And that is, again, that bright greeny yellow. And then it's going back to dark pink azaleas. Don't ask me the type, I don't remember. A light pink azalea. And the last hurrah will be the white azaleas in the background. And what's growing underneath them is Vinca major, which is a really good green mulch. So that's kind of a recurring theme of trying to fill up the space in my woodland garden. So we were lucky enough to move into this beautiful place where we had this funny bridge over a place with some very high weeds and a lot of mosquitoes. And we thought, well, maybe that was a stream, but it certainly is not a stream now. That first summer when my business was just starting and I had like single-digit clients, I put a lot of time into it myself. And I realized that the problem was that the water was sinking into the ground. So that's why we had a lot of sludge and a lot of mozzies. So I went to work and I went to Lowe's and got, plastic to line the stream and a recirculating pump. And I brought the water back up to the top and fed it out of this wonderful old spring house. And it worked like for two times, like for a half an hour each, and happily during cocktail hour. But I needed professional help, as they say. So I got a guy to come in. I already mentioned how many rocks we have on this property, and a lot of these were on the property, but he brought in some other cool kind of rivery type rocks. And he made it so that it really works well. The recirculation is strong, we get to hear it. It even has an overflow feature for heavy rain, and we've enjoyed it so much. And that horrible old bridge is now that cool stone that goes across. The spring house, just as an illustration of how crowded this place was with ivy, how overgrown, we didn't know that was there. It was so much ivy growing over it. And we're like, what is this opening? It seems to be a hole in the ground. We don't know where it came from. We don't know how old it is. It isn't on any records, but we like it a lot. All right, I wanted to show you, there's Mr. Jefferson right over there, so you definitely should pay homage to him. This is a failure in the garden, this big dead tree. So you know what they say, when a tree dies, a lot of other things get to live. And my arborist's idea, and we went with it, and it was a good thing to try, was to not cut it down all the way, but instead to make it into a habitat for hopefully a migratory bird. So he took his chainsaw and he made cross cuts on the top so that I guess they could grab on with their talons. And he made a hidey hole, something that termites woodpeckers probably would have done in 10 years. And we put out our vacancy sign and nobody came. And now, as you can see, that huge pieces of bark are about to fall on poor Mr. Jefferson's head, so we're going to have to get rid of it. So it won't be here next year, but it was a worthy effort, and I recommend just trying all kinds of things to get habitat to come to your yard. I brought you down here to look at some individually wonderful plants on this area that I'm working on. So you can see the azaleas behind me. You can tell that this is one of the ones that I didn't plant myself because it's bigger than most. It's a pretty good one. I don't mind the riot of colors this time of year because azaleas don't last that long individually. I'm not generally a fan of red and orange in the garden, but at this time of year, any color is fine with me. This is one of my favorite plants. It's a deutzia. Deutzias can get kind of big and hairy, but this is a small one, and it has lime green foliage. It stays neat, and it has the best name. The name is Chardonnay Pearls. I don't know who named it, but they should get a prize. Another bright green plant that I love, that I planted all up and down the stream because it can actually sit in water, is this Acorus gramineus, and it's almost certainly Ogon. And it self-seeds. There's some seeds right there. And the third one I wanted to point out in this little, well, it's a quartet, I guess the fourth one, is the foliage of something that'll bloom next fall. It's the Tricertus hirta, which some people call toad lily. And this one is the variegata, and so it picks up that lime green again. All right, I'm gonna wander over here and show you something that I made. So again, you dig, you get a rock. You dig, you get a rock. Under here was an old well. And it wasn't like the spring house, which was cool and wonderful and looked so antique. It was like 1950s, suburban-y, yucky. I wanted to cover it up. So we did cover it up for years and years with a piece of plywood. We began to doubt the integrity of said plywood, so we thought we better have a plan B. So I just went to town about a month ago and dug up all these heavy stones and made the most unattractive planter I've ever seen, and yet it makes me happy because I made it myself, and I'm calling it kind of Java the Hutt planter. But in it, I have more of my Acorus gramineus, and I have this super cool plant that I bought that I'm loving. Like, I just love the trunk of it. It is a salix, so it's a kind of a weeping willow. It's a Salix integra, and I'm going to mash up the Japanese name. It's like a Hashiki Hukuru or something like that. Variegated flowers, and it's just making me so happy. All right, now we're going to move on to some of the parts of the garden which aren't as beautiful. We're up on the Woodland Path right now. This is the second biggest tree in the garden. It is also a tulip poplar that makes me very happy. And this makes me very happy. This was a Christmas present from my husband, Wahoos, Keleher Harris, class of 81. I'm going to walk you along this path because I want to show you some of the not so beautiful things about my garden. And one of them is compost piles. I have 3 compost piles in each corner of my garden. That's a dozen, which is probably a little overkill. But there's a method in my madness. We're going to talk about that bridge in a minute. So over here, I'm constructing new ones. Now you can have a compost pile that looks like just a pile, which I was doing, but I wanted to sort of get a little organized. And what I like is the 3-bay system, where you're loading in and it's fresh and it's new and you sort of recognize it as stuff that you got out of your garden that day, spent flowers or whatever, sticks, leaves. And the next 2 are cooking. And so the one that's cooked the most and resting is the one that you're going to get stuff out of. And what you do with the stuff you get out of, what I do is I use it as a top dressing for mulch because it's full of these microbes that are going to really rejuvenate your soil and make it all wonderful. Leaf mold and wonderful things, sometimes weed seeds, but anyway, it's a wonderful way to give back to the soil the things that you've taken away from the garden. All right, let's look at this crazy bridge. So I am not a Tar Heel. I'm just not very good at picking out paint colors. Come across the bridge and I want to show you one other thing. We have a lot of rainwater that comes right past us on Minor Road. It's coming off of Lewis Mountain. And this is a pretty difficult part of the yard to water. There just isn't, we're not on well, we're on city. And I have a lot of things to water, especially when they're new. So I wanted to capture the rain and use it for my garden. So here's that crazy old piece of plywood that used to be over the well, and it's hiding this wonderful thing. So this PVC piping is connected to the gutter and to the street, and anytime it rains, we get a whole bunch of water. I pump it out with a sump pump, and it really gives good pressure. I mean, you can run a sprinkler with it. The PVC piping used to be stark white and very visible, but my husband, who is so talented, not only as a videographer, but as a painter, put camouflage paint all over it. So it's still ugly, but boy, nowhere near as ugly as it used to be. So those are two of my permaculture, not so pretty, but cool things in the garden. I wanted to talk to you about two things that were not going well in the garden that we fixed, and I'm really liking how they turned out. One of them is that this is our kitchen. A window that you can't see on this side is very large, and people walking along Minor Road have about 50 yards of being able to look in that kitchen and say, wow, the Harrises are having yet another cocktail. So without drawing the curtains, because the light is spectacular and the scene is good, I decided to extend this garden, which was ending with these spectacularly tall sky pencil ilexes. I did not plant them. I am so in love with them. They're much older than our 6 years here in the garden. But I put in this new garden and the green wall of the arborvitaes that will grow together and give us even more privacy. And I'm really happy with that. It's going to be a really good solution to a small problem. I want to show you one other thing back here that was a problem that we fixed. Wahoo wah. So if you look down to this circle part, this was a huge drainage problem. And 2 summers ago, when we had more than 30 inches above the average for rain, it was a real drainage problem. So I got my guy, the same guy who made the stream for me, to dig it out and to put down, instead of soil under there, there's tons of that ugly drainage gravel and plastic conduits that go from the natural springs there into the stream to give that even better flow. And meanwhile, I thought it was a kind of a cool design element. By the way, it almost became a putting green, but somebody was kind enough to agree to putt elsewhere. And so we have a fire pit down there and some benches. The fire pit's kind of neat. We were going to build one, but Jeff found a design for one that recirculates, and it's supposed to be smokeless. It is not smokeless, and yet there's very little smoke because of its design. I can't remember the name of it, but maybe I'll try to figure that out. We're going to talk after this film, and you're going to give me some questions, so perhaps I could look that up. You know, some other parts of my garden that I didn't even get to talk about, but I think I've talked long enough, are my little vegetable plot right here. And down by, I have some agaves down by that yucca where I'm trying to pretend like I live in Tucson, and they come in the winter, obviously. And then I have a fuzzy little knot garden, and that is full of boxwoods that I propagated myself up in Connecticut. So easily done, and it's hairy and not too organized, but it makes me very happy. Ask me questions about that or any other part of the garden. We're going to have a cocktail together. I'm going to stop talking at you via video, and we're going to start talking during Zoom. So I'll talk to you soon.
Hi, everyone. Leslie, that was terrific. We are now excited to get into the question and answer portion of the program. We received a number of questions in the registrations, as well as some that have just come in now. I think I'd like to start by asking how you started gardening. I know that you taught and coached for a number of years. And how did you make that transition?
Oh yeah, well, I started gardening for myself when I was in my mid-20s when I had a baby at home who was sleepy. And then the idea of doing it professionally came at a time that is sort of reminiscent of these days. I was under a little bit of stress, not knowing what was going to happen, because one of our two lovely children was an infantry officer in the Marine Corps. And I knew that I would be better off keeping myself busy in those years when he was going to be away. And so I thought, well, what can I do? And I got my master's degree in Spanish literature, and that was cool. That kept me distracted. But then I got the degree. And so he's still away. And so my garden that summer looked probably too good. I'm like, it was so damn good. And it was Jeff's idea. He said, you should do this for a living. And that was the idea, and it germinated, and I've been really enjoying it.
That's great. When you say in the video that, there are things in your garden that make you happy, how do you garden with things that make you happy, but also kind of obey what we think of more as gardening rules? Or
yeah, I'm really good at breaking those rules. I'm also pretty good at killing plants, pushing limits, not for my clients, but in my own garden, I like to experiment a lot. And so, for instance, that hideous looking planter, clearly not done by a professional mason. I was like, wow, that was really good exercise. I placed a bunch of those rocks myself, and it just makes me happy. When I actually go to speak to groups about gardening sometimes, and I like to stress that if you're hearing somebody in your gardening head or somebody who's giving you advice talking about rules in horticulture, they are there. There are guidelines, there are rules. I suppose you wouldn't want to, put plants that need drainage in a pot that has no drainage, they will die. But then again, I just feel like I feel very strongly that each garden is your garden, and whatever you do to make you happy is what you should do in your garden.
We have received several questions about native plants, and what are your favorites and how you incorporate them?
I am a big fan of native plants. I cannot tell you that I am the kind of gardener that says, and I will only have native plants, because I'm a big fan of all plants. But native plants are incredibly important. And if you are interested in that topic and you have not read Doug Tallamy's, who is an author and entomologist, if you haven't read Bringing Nature Home, I can't speak as articulately as he to the subject. But when I read that book, it made it all clear to me, like, oh, we all have to plant oak trees. They are the host of these insects. We have to have these insects. We have to have these natives. I am also one to have competition for those natives, and I'll have lots of plants that are not native. But I think that every garden should incorporate a good number of them, and lots of them are beautiful plants.
What was the author's name again of the book you just mentioned?
Doug Tallamy.
Doug Tallamy. Okay, great. Thank you. People are also curious to hear, we're in Virginia, home of many boxwoods. Curious to hear updates just on the boxwood blight, how that's going, and then sort of related about cutting back boxwoods, if you have advice about how to do that.
So they do go hand in hand. We are lucky here in Charlottesville because about 35 miles south of us is probably the most important one of the biggest purveyors of boxwood, and the name of the company is Saunders Brothers. And they're working, because it's their livelihood, they want to sell boxwoods. They're working very hard to develop a new type, and I can't remember the name of it, that is less prone to get the disease. But they're also very good about making clear and there are so many different types of boxwoods. I have a lot of trouble keeping them all straight. There's so much about horticulture that I don't know. But anyway, the ones that are really tight and have very little air circulation are more prone to getting it. If you work in your own garden and you really care about your boxwoods, a good thing to do to realize that the blight is going to be, your plants are going to be much more susceptible to blight in very moist and high humid weather. So we had a real problem 2 summers ago. And also if your boxwoods don't get a lot of air circulation. So proper pruning of boxwoods is to poke holes in them, not just to cut on the outside, but to reach in, lift the skirt, and make sure there's air flowing through them. But while I have this platform, let me just say that I would think that one of the most important things that you can do
to keep your boxwood safe is to make sure that if you have a landscaper coming onto your property, that landscaper knows how that disease is spread. And if they don't, they could be endangering your plants. It's easy enough to find out. They should know. They probably do. You know, we spray ourselves between properties to keep our next clients safe. But it's really important, because if they don't know, that could be a way it's spreading.
Okay. We also, again, not surprisingly for Virginia, we've had a couple of questions about deer-proof shrubs and perennials, if you have favorites.
Yes, deer-proof shrubs. They're like the evergreens, very boring. I don't know. But perennials, I can do that real well. Let us start with winter, and you have the hellebores. They won't eat hellebores. They won't eat daffodils. They won't eat peonies. Hello, we all love peonies. Later in the summer, they're not too fond of echinacea, rudbeckia, nepeta, salvia. They don't love asters. Honestly, but you could have a set of deer that are so hungry. I've seen them eat English ivy, which is actually a good thing, because we don't like English ivy. It's an alien invasive. I got a fence. I was not ready to have deer friend, you know, the ones that the deer don't like. I just wasn't willing to do that. There are sprays, there are granulars. If you have a vicious dog, that's helpful. Yeah, keep fighting the good fight.
Okay. Let's see, we have a question about how do you attract pollinators to your garden? And then they say, but not with a butterfly bush. So do you have other?
Yeah, butterfly bushes would get you lots of butterflies. Butterfly bushes, Buddleia is the name of the genus, are not bad plants, and they've started to make ones that are less invasive, but they actually are a fairly invasive plant. They sell so very readily, and the nectar that they provide is not as nutritious as some native plants, such as, a great substitute plant for a Buddleia would be the vitex. Some people call that the chase tree. So it serves a lot of the same purpose. My garden is full of pollinators, because my garden is full of flowers, but I do try to keep in mind that a lot of the plants that I should be having are host plants. So for instance, Asclepias, or that would host the larva of butterfly. I do think it's really important, if you just can't not have that one plant that's, or in my case, several dozen plants that are not native, that may still attract pollinators, as long as you have some good ones. I think it's all going to work out in the end.
Great. And now weeds. People like to talk about weeds too.
Awesome questions, yeah.
Yeah, so how do you keep weeds away without wreaking havoc on the environment is one question.
So easy. You bend over and you pull. Such great exercise. And then you feed your compost pile, and then you get great compost in the end. It's a really good cycle. The only time where on my property, if it's a really big one, I just get a shovel. We have to do it very occasionally. There's this one client that we have where bamboo grows in his neighbor's yard, and it's coming into his. And so we literally paint it so it doesn't touch any, the glyphosate, which is Roundup, is systemic. That means it's only going to impact the plant that you're touching with. So spraying it, especially on a windy day, not such a great idea. But if you paint it onto that one plant, that plant should die, and hopefully you haven't hurt too many other things.
Great. And if you could explain your mulching process, when and where and...
Great. So why do we mulch? We have 4 good reasons to mulch, and they are to suppress weeds. It's not foolproof, but it helps. To keep in the moisture so you don't have to water so often. So that the mulch decompose, while it decomposes, it feeds the soil. That's a really good reason. And the 4th one is because it looks awesome. It makes your plants pop out. I love a double shredded hardwood bark mulch, but in the back, I have a fairly large garden. I'm not gonna mulch that whole darn thing. I use leaves, and leaves do all of those things. They don't look as pretty, but they absolutely feed the soil. So a great time to mulch is when you are feeling strong and you have time. A great time to mulch is fall is just to let those leaves fall down. And then if you're not loving the look, I'm actually kind of not loving it right now. My back part of my garden is leaves look a little tatty. So I'm sort of going over it with compost to make it look darker and richer and neater.
And how about mulch with things like iris or...
Oh yeah, so being careful of how to apply the mulch. And if you have a landscaper, you might want to check on this. Mulch is not a friend to any woody plant. So the mulch can go right up next to the woody plant, but really shouldn't touch it. The plant gets air through that place where the soil meets the plant. So you want to just scoot it away so that it has that air flow at the bottom of it. And there are also two perennials that are often overlooked, and there might be others, but the ones that we come across most often that do not profit from a heavy layer of mulch are irises, because they like their little tubers to be sitting in the sun almost, really almost exposed. And then peonies also do not like to be buried deep. So if you're having trouble with your peonies blooming, you might want to scoot away some mulch.
Okay, how about roses? Same thing with roses?
Roses, same thing. So they're woody, so you would mulch
Woody,
around them, but you don't want that mulch to touch.
Gotcha, okay. How about, there are a couple of questions about pruning.
Pruning. You know what
yes.
they say? You prune.
I mean,
you prune when your hand pruners are sharp and you have time. That's when you prune. But a lot of people have been asking about spring flowering shrubs. So the best time to prune them is right after they have bloomed. So that way you're not taking away, the buds for next year will have time to form. But you have more time than you think. For instance, if you look at an azalea that's fading away in terms of flowers in your yard today and you don't get to it until June, that's still, here in Virginia, you still have plenty of time for buds to form and for you to get some flowers. I also do a lot of winter pruning, even on plants that I know are going to flower in the spring. And here's why. If like they're low branches or crowded branches, those branches might support flowers, but those aren't going to be flowers that I'm going to enjoy because they're growing along the ground or they're in the middle of the bush and that bush needs more air. So winter pruning on those is okay. You'll have fewer flowers, but you'll have the flowers that you want.
Okay. How about this relates to the video? Somebody asked, is Euphorbia that you mentioned in the beginning, that you pointed out to us, is that a perennial in Virginia?
Yes, there are some types that are annuals, and I wish I could tell you what they were, but I cannot. When I think about euphorbias, there is one thing that I always mention if you were to grow a euphorbia, it has that nasty sap. So if you cut it and bring it indoors, wash your hands right away because it can make some people very uncomfortable. Don't touch your eyes. I've done that. Very uncomfortable.
Okay. And another question, somebody asked, how about transplanting large azaleas 20 plus years old? Is that possible? And if so, how and when?
Oh, get somebody strong to help you. Any time is fine, but the best time to transplant anything is spring and fall because the temperatures of the soil are a little bit more even. That it's difficult you can transplant in summer, and you can transplant in winter. Things are a little bit more shocked in winter. In summer, you make sure you have to water a lot. And azalea you're lucky. Both azaleas and boxwoods and rhodos and hydrangeas, and I'm sure other ones I can't think of right now, really all have fairly shallow root systems. So if you're ready to get to work, it could be done. It's worth a try. Go for it.
How about, you mentioned your little knot garden of the boxwoods that you propagated in Connecticut. How do you propagate boxwood?
Well, if you're like me, you go to trim the hedge and you don't clean up after yourself. And then about a week later, you realize, oh, hello, you have rooted in my garden. And so once I realized how easy it was, no root hormone, no nothing, every time I went to trim that little hedge in Connecticut, I would stick 20 things in the ground and probably 5 or 7 of them would become plants. And that is why that garden exists, just from me being the thrifty and patient gardener that I am. So you can propagate those fairly easily. And lots of plants are more difficult, but I recommend that everybody who's interested in propagation have a place in their garden near a hose, because new little babies like a lot of water, where you're just kind of experimenting and trying with things, rooting things, and trying to get more plants.
Okay, we have another question that just came in. Can you suggest plants for an area that have poor drainage?
Yes, because that circle place that I was talking about in the last part of the video, very poor drainage. So let me tell you what I planted down there. I planted a wonderful native bush called, well, they call it button bush. Now let me think if I can think of the botanical name, that would be great. I can't. Buttonbush, that will sit in water. Hibiscus, they're a native hibiscus. Those will sit in water. There's some great irises. The Insata iris, which is the Japanese iris, will sit, which is a great bog plant. What else did I put down there? What is the name of that plant? They call it ligularia, and some people call it farfugium, and that will sit in water. And some people call it tractor sheet because it has those cool big round seeds that look like a tractor sheet. And I put some colocasia, which seems to have survived the winter, and they will sit in water also. Oh, and hammer caliswell, daylilies. Even though, especially those ones you don't want, the horrible orange fulva daylilies. I'm not a big fan, but other ones will too.
The ones you refer to as ditch lilies?
Yes, they grow very well in ditches, and that is where they should live.
Okay, here's a question about the climate. How has your garden changed from Connecticut to Virginia?
Great. So according to those, numbers, which I can never keep straight, so we're 7A or 7B. I'm sure somebody could correct me on that. And I think that's the same up in Connecticut. So that's kind of funny, but definitely different. It's just so much longer of a really hot, humid summer here. And so, I can't, there's some things that just they're just not happy. Like my macrophylla hydrangeas, which were so fun up in Connecticut, they sort of spit out a few blooms down here, and I keep cheering for them and wanting them to do it. Other hydrangeas do beautiful, but those macrophylla, the big mop head ones, not so much. And then, I can't think of that plant. Sorry, some things are not available to me at certain times. But a couple of plants that were sort of go-tos in Connecticut are just like, wow, I'm not so happy here. But I've had so much fun going on the, if I can protect something like, I have a Fatsia japonica that made it through the winter. That's not really supposed to happen. So you can really stretch the edges of your zone if you're daring.
How about, so you mentioned also at the beginning of the film that you have voles in the backyard, and somebody's asking how you handle those.
I try not to cry. I had a garden tour come, and I wanted, in that little knot garden, it looks so good if you put cute things like pansies in the middle of it. So I planted them in plastic. Yes, and I might stoop to that for the garden tour next year because they just eat everything. We had somebody come and do these smoke bombs that didn't seem to work. I've been listening to somebody who puts out a trap with peanut butter, interested in that. But one of the things that has worked best is that we seem to have a little family of foxes in our neighborhood. And I am so excited. Every time I see them, I'm like, come here, come, we have dinner for you. It's hard. It's really hard. Oh, can I go back to the deer situation?
Sure.
So I just wanted to say that if you are wondering what a good plant is for you, there's a really good resource that I have, I think it's on my tabs on my computer, it's one of those ones I go to all the time. And if you were to Google Rutgers University deer resistant plants, it'll pop right up. And they have, they've listed them according to how deer resistant they are. So if you're wondering what to put, that is a really good resource for deer.
Great. Now somebody asking about tulips, whether you dig up your bulbs every year or you let them play themselves out.
I am too lazy to dig up my bulbs every year. And when, they keep coming back, and of course they tend to peter out. So I just keep digging. I just keep planting more. I think if I were a real fancy gardener with a real fancy place and I needed it to look quite good, I would dig them up and start again. But as we've discussed, I'm a little bit on the cheap and thrifty side. So yeah, I just say good luck and hope you do well next year. Hope to see you. Come on back.
Let's see, you mentioned, I don't know if I'll pronounce this correctly, Rudbeckia.
Yeah.
You mentioned Rudbeckia early in the tour. What is that plant? What is
so that's a native, and it's a good pollinator. It's called Rudbeckia Maxima, and it's a perennial. I was attracted to it because the foliage that I showed you, that leaf, it's almost as big and juicy as like a hosta, but it's full sun. It's gray green. It's like a glaucous color, and they do attract the goldfinches. The plants themselves, the flowers themselves are not the cute little black-eyed Susans that are so, daisy-like and adorable. They are kind of prehistoric. They almost look like badminton shuttlecocks. They're just not real cute. You wouldn't describe them as cute, but they're interesting, and they do attract good pollinators and those goldfinches that I love to see.
Great. What gardening books would you recommend?
So when I got started, I actually put them right here. I thought
Oh, great. Good. Perfect question.
This is one of my favorite books. It's written by it's Barbara Damrosch, and it's glorious. And I think we're probably in the 80s here. And I think she's republished it a few times, but it really spoke to me as a new gardener because, and one of the things that like really stuck in my head was, if you don't know what to do with a plant, just think like a plant. Think, what do you need? And if you know about plants, well, you need some water, but you don't need too much water. And this plant might need more water than that plant. So just beginning to understand what individual plants do. This book is organized in vegetables, perennials, annuals, trees, shrubs, and it takes you through each plant. And I just ate it up, and it's been left out in the rain several times. I love it. There's another one that I like called The Principles of Gardening by Hugh Johnson. I think this is also quite an early edition. I'm sure he's put it out again. This one's probably a little bit less basic, but it is, it goes through, it actually teaches you, and this was way before I ever thought I would be a professional gardener, it teaches you kind of the nursery strategy and regime and shoots into roots and how this all works. So I learned a great deal from it. I like magazines. My favorite ones are Horticulture, Fine Gardening. The English ones that I like are Gardens Illustrated. And I am now liking more the English Garden, if you get that. For a while, I loved it. And then for a while, they just got a little insipid and like, here's another beautiful plant. And, there would be a gorgeous woman with an apron and the straw hat, and the apron has never been touched by anybody's mud. I don't think she's ever touched her mud. And I'm like, but now they're actually more into the names of plants, the care of plants, horticulture, and what to do to get good results. So I do recommend that one. And can I talk about podcasts?
Sure.
Okay. So my favorite podcast is the BBC Gardener's Question Time, which has been going on for 70 years. And they do a panelist of awesome people named like Bob Flowerdew and Pippa Greenwood. These are real people who are real horticulturists. And so they're posed questions. And in my situation, the more I know about horticulture, the more I know I don't know about horticulture. But those people actually do know about horticulture. And besides, they're a panel, and if one doesn't know, then the other will. So I learn a whole lot from there. And my latest favorite is called Let's Argue About Plants. And those are the editors of Fine Gardening. And they just beat each other up. It's like, why would you choose that? That's a terrible plant. Instead, we're going to talk about this one. So it's funny, and you learn a lot about plants.
Great. Okay, we have a couple other questions. One, wondering if you can talk about gardening in the Albemarle Red Clay, what to do to amend the soil, etc.
And we wonder where they got all those bricks, because that's what you see when you dig around here. My compost is helping me a lot in this garden. So where your plant's roots are going to be, and if you want to do just cute little annuals or perennials, they're not going to be too deep. But with and the trees and the shrubs that you might choose can penetrate that stuff. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But if you're like, my vegetables are drowning in this clay that should be used to like make a statue, you do want to amend it. You can either dig it in, or just over the years use that compost or mulch. They both serve the same purpose. Compost works a little faster to have those organisms go down and be pulled into that soil to add air and lightness and make it more friable and better to work with.
Great. What would you suggest for planting under old trees that take a lot of the moisture from the ground around them?
That's a tough one. So dry shade, we're talking dry shade.
Yes. Where grass can't grow.
Yeah, that's the worst. I have a lot of dry shade. Epimedium is a great woodland plant. It's a low kind of, how to describe, it's got a cute little flower that you would wander past in March and say, wow, what is that? So bright yellow. That's a really good one. Hostas can take, once they're established, hostas, if you don't have too many deer in your yard, hostas can take some dry, and they certainly can take shade. What else do I have back there? Heucheras, they like a little bit of a mix, and but they don't love a ton of water. Eucheras, eucherellas, tiarellas, all that kind of thing. And then I would say some other ground covers such as, one that I'm growing right now that can take some dry and that's blooming right now is the Phlox divaricata, which always makes me smile, because one time I was in a nursery and I overheard somebody saying, "Do you have that phlox that's blooming right now? You know, the Phlox diverticulitis?" And I did that and I turned, but it's Phlox divaricata and it's blooming right now. It's a great little woodland plant, and it doesn't love dry, but it'll take some dry and certainly shade.
Okay, and now a watering question. How often to water shrubs, trees, other plants
Great question.
in the
So
summer?
think about the root system of the plant that you're watering. So right before before we were doing this, I was checking out my daughter's seedlings. She's gardening for the first time up in Connecticut, and they're so tiny, they're so adorable. And so their root system is probably, about a half a centimeter long. She does not need to water them. They're very long at all, just a little spritz. But if you're talking about an oak tree, and you're going through a drought and you really want to save it, you just have to stick that hose on it, at a slow drip for probably a week. That's why we like a nice soaking rain, because rain tends to run off. Plants would want more water less often than very little water often, because the roots are going to find that water. And if you've only watered the top inch or two of that soil, the roots are not going to go deep where you want them to go. So water as frequently as you can. And if it's a new plant, if you're like, but it's a new plant, how should I deal with this? A good rule of thumb, and all rules of thumb can be broken, is every day for the first week, every week for the first month, every month for the first year. But if you're going through a drought, of course, that wouldn't apply. Or if you're going through a monsoon, that wouldn't apply. So use your head, think like a plant.
Great. Here's somebody who says, "I love ground covers like vinca. How do you keep them in the more natural areas but control them in the more manicured flower beds?"
Oh, it's the same thing in terms of weeds. You got to bend over and pull. And we call it, you just got to get your exercise. We call it DMZ. So you got to give your more precious perennials a demilitarized zone. They do not want to live with those vinca roots. That's competition that they don't need. So I mentioned vinca. That was a vinca major that I have growing underneath those azaleas. And they can compete because the vinca there has a root system that's really only going down about half as far as the root system of the azaleas. So they're okay. That's fair game. And besides, there's not a lot of sun there. So it depends on the plant, depends on how much you love it, but definitely those aggressive ground covers are going to win. And if you don't want them to win, you must remove them.
Somebody's asking about the compost. Well, how do you start compost? I mean, do you use kitchen compost in your compost?
I do. Let me show you something fun. So I have these tubs and they're completely airtight. One time I was shopping for a compost container back when I was not a professional gardener. And the ones that I found like on Amazon had all these like ventilation holes. And I'm like, I don't want fruit flies. Are you kidding? It absolutely has to be airtight, because you do get pets if you do this and you want them to go back in that airtight container. So as soon as I fill up one of these with lovely things like avocado pits and orange rinds and stuff, it goes down to a tumbler that I have. And the tumbler is full of fruit flies. And by the time, I actually did this today, I flipped that, if you follow me on Instagram, Leslie Harris, LH, I'm so glad to be sitting down because I flipped those compost piles, and that is a lot of exercise. And I added the large thing of disgusting kitchen compost to the middle of my middle bay. By the time I see that stuff again, I won't recognize it as avocados. Well, maybe avocados because they're kind of wooden, but I certainly won't recognize any banana peels or orange rinds or old lettuce heads or anything. They were pretty much gone when I loaded them in there. So that's the step. If I opened it up, you would recognize it. I let it sit. I take it to one of those plastic tumblers, and then I feed from that really gross, mucky stuff, which I wouldn't want to put on my plants because it's really gross, mucky stuff and full of too much nitrogen. It would burn them. It's still decomposing, and put it into my regular, and this is what I deadheaded today, and leaves and weeds and that compost pile. And so it all becomes one. And at the end, you get some really beautiful black gold.
And how long would you say before it turns from, what you're starting with into the the good stuff.
Yeah, too long. You have to wait for it. But a tree fell down right at that particular compost pile last year, and I realized, oh, I see, sunlight has really, and I'd read that your compost pile should be in the sun to make it break down easier so it can get that rain and it can get that sun. But how many people would like to put the compost pile like in the most obvious part of their yard? So I stick them back in the corners, which nobody can see, and they're very shady. So it takes a while. So I like that 3-bay system so that the container that's cooking the most, I probably won't empty for 6 months, maybe more.
Oh, okay. Great. Couple of questions about container gardening. Any suggestions for starter container gardens?
Yes. First of all, make sure you have drainage. That unless you're growing like papyrus or something, make sure that there's always good drainage. And when you go to water those, you water enough so that the water actually flows out of the bottom. So you make sure that all those roots are going down to the bottom. When I plant a perennial garden, I definitely give space. And so you see little plant and mulch and little plant and mulch, but I can't resist when I plant a container, it is full on at the beginning. I stuff it. And therefore, as the season goes on, things might become a little tangly and crowded. So part of my maintenance routine and ours in the business is to go ahead and reduce each annual. Annuals are little powerhouses. All they want to do is produce flowers. They have no chance next year. This is it for them. They just want to live. And that's the way they're going to do that, is to produce seeds from their flowers. So we go through and we take away about 25% of that petunia, say, each time we go to tend that pot so that there's always fresh new growth, because things can get woody and overcrowded. So I hope that helps.
Yes. We now have had a couple of questions, follow-on questions about your compost. Do your compost piles attract, one question says, varmints?
Oh, I hope so. So just those little squiggly things that I can't name because I'm not an entomologist. That's what I want to attract. In terms of, yeah, I would never take the garbage from my kitchen to my compost. It has that intermediate thing. If you don't have that intermediate tumbler, you can bury it. If you put an avocado rind into your, things are going to come and be quite interested in that. Squirrels, birds, foxes, rats. So you don't want to do that. But if you handle it properly, then they shouldn't. And then if you decide, no, I'm not putting my kitchen garbage there, I'm putting my kitchen garbage in the garbage. No, there's nothing but, so what you're putting in there would not attract anything but insects. And they, because you're putting in weeds, old foliage, sticks, leaves. So no, that would not be a problem.
Okay, great. How about we have time for a couple more. Just how about a natural cure, or how to get rid of poison ivy?
Oh gosh. Okay, so if you have a lot, you need to find a friend who doesn't get that rash. They're out there. I have found them. I am not one of them. If you just have a little, if you're like, there it is, but I can't touch it, you can touch it. Grab a plastic bag, like something from the newspaper, put it on your hand, get it, flip it, and put that in the trash. Or you can actually put on garden gloves, you can touch it, get it, put it someplace where you're not going to touch it again. That oil, I think it's called Ushiol, or I can never pronounce it. It's got some oil. Apparently that lasts on your garden gloves, your tools, your shoes for say 50 years. So that means if you walk through it and then you put on your shoes and then you did this, guess where it is? So you want to be really careful of it, but you can wash it off. So use garden gloves. And when I'm in a hurry, if I know I have to touch it because it's a weed and I got to get rid of it, I grab it, do away with it. And then I just take my gloves and I scrub them with soil or mulch to get that oil off. And then just like in these times, it's very topical. I do not touch my face when I'm wearing gloves.
Let's see, tips for growing hydrangeas.
Depends on the type. There's so many different types. So that the type that I was complaining about earlier that doesn't bloom as well for me down here in Virginia, which is the macrophylla, you would want to put in semi-shade here in Virginia. They pout in the sun. But there's some wonderful ones that will take full sun. My favorite is a great pollinator, a native plant, and I have it all over this garden, and it's an arborescence type, and it's called Annabelle. And I have it in full-on blasting sun in that front garden, and I have it in deep, deep shade in the back garden. The back garden, the shady ones don't bloom nearly as much, but when they bloom, it's like this halo of white at cocktail time. It's like, ooh, what is that? So I love that one. One of my other favorites is Little Lime, which I grow a lot, or Limelight. So those are the ones that kind of go lime green to white to pink kind of shades. They cut beautifully. You can put them in dried arrangements. Yeah, those are probably my favorite. I love hydrangeas, I do.
And now, of course, no UVA program would be complete without a basketball question. And somebody has written in to ask, which player from the 2019 team do you think would make the best gardener?
That is a really good question. Let me see. I would think just his intuitive sense would make it so that Clark would be quite good. I mean, he doesn't overthink things. He just does. And I think you can be a thinking gardener, or you can actually just go kind of by instinct, which I kind of enjoy. Oh my gosh, who do you think, Robin?
Oh gosh, let's go. We'll go with Kehei. Let's go with Kehei. Maybe Kyle Guy.
Yeah, close to the ground.
Yes, right. We'll see. Okay. Thank you so much, Leslie. This has been terrific. We have many other questions that came in that we will respond to later. Thank you again to our Virginia UVA clubs. Thank you also to Elizabeth Muse in our office, a major gardener and senior director of UVA clubs, for her enthusiasm. And thank you to everyone behind the scenes who helped make this idea a reality today. Thank you to all who joined from home. This event will be on our site, the UVA Club site. Oh my gosh, a cameo by Ginny, the Springer Spaniel. Yay!
Thank you I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
So great. Leslie shares, as she mentioned, more of her gardening tips every Tuesday on her Instagram account, Leslie Harris LH, and we will sign off. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Happy gardening, and wahoo wah. Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.